Welcome back to the Supply Chain Careers Leadership Series featuring our host, Chris Gaffney. I'm Rodney Apple alongside of Mike Ogle, your co-host. And today's episode will cover leading orchestrated supply chains. Just as a reminder, if you have not listened to these episodes before, the first 10 cover the various ways and tactics to lead yourself. The second 10 cover how you can improve your ability to lead others. So we do recommend that you go back in and listen to these if you haven't already. They are timeless in terms of advice and tactics for improving your overall leadership series.
And with that, Chris, what is an orchestrated supply chain, and how does this topic fit in with our series at this point?
Mike, the way I think about it, the baseline paradigm for operating a supply chain is that your company does everything, and all the people that you interact with work for you or work for the same corporate owner. But the fact of the matter is that's not the case for almost anybody in this day and age. The true hard asset end-to-end supply chain is actually very uncommon. There are some situations where that exists. But in almost every supply chain that I interact with, there are other companies involved, clearly suppliers, raw material input suppliers, but in many cases, all aspects of the supply chain are up for grabs for some partner to play a role. And for some companies, the true asset-light companies, the entire strategy is to leverage other companies. And frankly, in general, I think the trend is partners play a different or a growing role in many supply chains, both in providing physical activities and increasingly in providing administrative work and even knowledge work. This is a pretty relevant topic for our audience because it's how do you interact and influence people who don't work for the same company that you work for. So that's really what we want to get into today. And my experience would say is people who are really good at dealing across cross-functional lines within a company are successful. But if you can deal effectively across commercial lines and influence people who you work with to get your product and service to the ultimate consumer, you can really differentiate yourself and accelerate your career. I think that's really how this topic fits into the overall intent of the series.
Yeah, Chris, if I had to summarize that, it's first 10 episodes is leading yourself. The next 10 is leading others. And we're diving now into leading through others.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And even in that, if you think about it, Rodney, we talked about leading teams, then leading extended teams, influencing cross-functionally, and now we're into the Wild West of having to deal with people who are in completely different companies.
Chris, sticking with our theme of leadership, what are the most critical leadership skills that are required to successfully manage orchestrated supply chains consisting of these third parties that we've discussed?
Yeah, and I would say the one aspect that I think is important, but is not a differentiator, is all of these relationships are bound by a commercial agreement. And I think it's important to get the right commercial agreement in place because that's how you structure the economic motives and incentives for a relationship like this to be successful over time. But in my experience, the irony is the best relationships, once you put that commercial relationship to bed, you don't ever go back and look at that contract because you're working at a different level. If I really think about the skill sets that are really important in dealing with these commercial relationships, they really build down to, first and foremost, building trust, right? Everyone has a lot at stake in these relationships. And so the people who start from a place of trust really have the best foundation to build that relationship. And so it really gets to people who have strong interpersonal skills. Communication is a foundation of trust that people understand where each party sits. You typically find when you've got a difficult relationship, communication lacking is a problem with that. So you've got to have somebody who's got really good interpersonal skills, really good communication skills. What follows beyond that trust is clarifying expectations and objectives. So what is each party supposed to do in order for the relationship to be successful? I think those things are foundational. I would also say, ideally, for someone to be really effective here, they've got to have some pretty good kind of strategic thinking in mind. These relationships deal practically in the very short term. They are, by definition, relationships that are intended to extend over time and ideally to extend over multiple years. So somebody's got to be able to think a bit long term while at the same time dealing with tactical execution. And we've talked about those skills in some of the other episodes, but I think that's a pretty important thing. And I think the last thing for me that I think is important in terms of the key skills is the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes. Different companies have different cultures. And so understanding the people on the other side of that fence that are your partner, whether they're upstream or downstream of your business, understanding a bit about the world in which they live in, how work gets done, how people are rewarded and motivated in that organization, and make sure that the work that you're doing with them reflects the realities about how they have to get things done within their own company.
And Chris, in my classes that I teach in operations management and supply chain management,